also talking about how they're going to do based off of the players that they lose and the ones that they return or gain. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the Centennial League edition of previews. And we're going to start it off basically the same way that I start off every single Centennial League preview and talk about my alma mater, Arapahoe High School here. And let's go ahead and talk about last season, where they rode a new offensive scheme to great success, going 8-2 in the regular season and only losing by a combined 12 points to the two teams who now made state, while beating the likes of Legacy, Regis, Rock Canyon, Grandview, Eaglecrest, and a few others to earn a bye here. And, they would unfortunately suffer a heartbreaking loss to, an underseeded Chatfield squad, one that came in a little underrated, in my opinion, in overtime to end this very talented class of 24's senior season. But, it was still a pretty legendary one. We had the first wide receiver from Arapahoe to make a top 5 list in Charlie Eckhart, who is also one of the very first players to be a top 5 at multiple positions. And that kind of is a great segue for the graduated seniors segment. Charlie Eckhart, shout out to him. Go ahead and listen to his interview as well. There was a few episodes ago by this point, and hearing him talk about the season and some things that were key to their success, where he name drops a handful of these other guys, like the guy who was delivering him the football on the offensive side and Mikey Moynihan. He greatly benefited from the change of scheme and let it rip this past season to the tune of 19 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions and completing 63% of his passes. He also had a senior running back in Carter Neely, who nearly got 700 yards as well as 4 touchdowns to help this stable of running backs stay fresh here. And then, part of the success of this rushing attack and this dynamic kind of like air run and gun kind of thing that this squad had going on was Brendan Crispy, committed to University of South Dakota, I believe, 6'8", basically 6'9", I actually think, 290 pounds, probably almost 300 by this point. Going to be really tough to replace an athlete like that, but, very, very solid up front. Shout out to Cade Kaminsky as well, senior tight end, an essential function for the dynamic rushing attack on that side of the ball. And then defensively, the Warriors here lose their top 6 tacklers and overall only bring back 2 players who had double-digit tackles. So a complete reshuffle on the defensive side of the ball. Amongst the studs leaving includes Will Knox, 122 tackles, 13.5 for loss. David Moritz, who had 100, stud weapon. Wyatt Staubach, who had 4 pass breakups. Sam Butler, who led the team with 3 picks. Dylan Juarez with 2 picks and a fumble recovery, along with a handful of tackles in there. Shout out senior cornerback Bodie Shielhaus as well, Shielhaus. And, this defense was very, very prominent here. Not to mention Acker and Neerling, who both had over 10 pass breakups, making them one of the hardest defenses to even get a pass on, with a variety of athletes on the back end and depth at cornerback, preventing other teams from scoring more than 15.5 points per game here. Just an elite level defense, less than 2 touchdowns and 2 extra points per game, basically. So very, very high level defense combined with a very dynamic offense last season. But what's going to be able to help them this upcoming season? Well, let's take a look here, because while they will still be without Crispy here, they do return multi-year starter Ben Brown to the fold in the offensive line, along with other class of 25 monsters, Tommy Whitehouse and Braden Bax, who should keep the next quarterback fresh and pave lanes just like they did last year for a dynamic rushing attack that can attack you in a variety of ways. One of those is incoming junior tailback Trajan Frazier. Shout out Mad Skills and Coach Voss over there, who ran for 822 yards on just 149 carries and was a big play threat, racking up 13 scores in a backfield by committee approach that should give him plenty of gas to up the production this season. There's another class of 26 kid in Jaden Tackett, I want to say, who averaged over 8 yards per carry on just 27 carries. That's kind of a change of pace piece in 4 games, and if healthy and fit, should see more touches in this offense. Not sure what the status of incoming freshmen is on the depth chart specifically, but it is worth noting that middle school All-State athlete Marcelo Jeremio will be going to Arapahoe as a shifty pass-catching back, and additionally Theo Lee, who is a quarterback coming in as a freshman at 6'3" and over 200 pounds with a powerful arm and could really unlock the ceiling of this offense. Once again, not sure if these freshmen are going to get varsity snaps, but they are 2 star freshmen coming in, or star 8th graders, I should say, who played very, very well in their middle school ball. Granted, whoever's under center is going to benefit from the 6'4" jump ball receiver Andrew Smart, who led the team in receiving touchdowns last year with 11 and went nuclear in the Grandview game that I attended on my birthday with Coach V. Coming back to defense, you have linebacker Owen Sherrod, whose film I wish we had, but had 9.5 TFLs, a few sacks, and over 40 tackles here. And then a special safety / kind of cornerback / maybe wide receiver too is Levi Brayton here, 6'2" frame. I think that he could slide into the wide receiver 2 role nicely and kind of fill in anywhere else that they need some skill work. But he's definitely going to be taking on a much bigger role on the defensive side of the ball here. And then you also have at 6 foot, 205 pounds, Anthony Cloutier. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. His film caught our eye, and with him and Owen in the middle, they might be able to keep the boat afloat for the defenses here, filling in lanes that force backs to find these gaps here created by the defensive line here. But let's go ahead and look at their schedule for this season and see how they do. Now, Arapahoe here, very interesting schedule. They have Mountain Vista to start off the year, and then we play again at Heritage, or they play again on a Saturday. It looks like it's a day game, at least, which is a little bit odd. But I digress here a little bit. Mountain Vista is going to be very, very good this year. This will be a huge test for the Warriors in the first game. I think that Vista is just returning a lot more consistency on both sides of the ball. So I think that they probably drop this opening game as their defense kind of gets used to a new look and whatnot. Now, they then follow that up against Heritage. They've won the Milk Jug so many years in a row at this point. I think that they continue that tradition here with Heritage, who is also losing some pretty key players in key spots. I don't think it'll kind of be the cruise that it has been the past few years, honestly. I think that Heritage has come a little bit of ways, and they have some serious top-end talent, but they are almost graduating their entire defense as well. So I think that's a little bit more opportunistic for the consistency that is on the Arapahoe side and just the offense that they run. They then play against Thunder Ridge. I think that that's going to be a win at home. They then play at Pine Creek. Pine Creek going over a huge change. Lots of players exiting, new coach, new system. This one, while it's at Pine Creek, I think that this is a game that Arapahoe should still win here. And then they end their league, or non-league play, I should say, against Rock Canyon at home. This game has kind of gone back and forth over the years. Rock Canyon returning a very similar kind of lineup here as Arapahoe as far as what players are returning here. Now, Arapahoe here is going to need their defense to really show up. But by this point in the season, I think that they'll kind of be on a roll here and kind of iron things out here. So they could definitely enter league play at 4-1. Now, as of now here, they're going to be squaring off against Grandview on October 4th to start their league play. And they kind of go big or go home early with at Grandview and at Cherry Creek to start their league here. I think that they really can go 1-1 in these games. I think Grandview is susceptible this year, but, Arapahoe has a tendency to drop a league game that maybe they should win from time to time. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go 0-2, but I really think that they should split this, beating Grandview and then probably losing to Creek on the road. Then they play Smoky Hill and Cherokee Trail at home here. Cherokee Trail is returning a lot of talent on this side, so just on both sides, I should say. So it depends on how healthy they are, but, I think that they beat Smoky Hill, and then Cherokee Trail, kind of a toss-up, and I'll say the same about Eaglecrest. They played Eaglecrest really close last year. If the offense is clicking and the quarterback is comfortable by this point, this is definitely a winnable game. So I'd say that the only games that they, quote-unquote, for sure lose, if you would, I think that they lose 2 games at least here, but they don't lose any more than 4. So that puts them at a window of wins from 6 to 8 here. And I do think that they are probably going to go 7-3 here. I think that's a pretty safe bet, just knowing how this team kind of functions and, what they have going for them. And we'll see what happens at the quarterback position, because I think that dictates kind of how some of these league games go, like a Cherokee Trail, like an Eaglecrest, like a Grandview here. But I do think that they finish with a winning record in league, which is important. So a 3-2 record in league and 4-1 record out of league, and that puts them squarely at 7-3. Like I said, with a window of wins of 6-8. And I alluded to it a little bit here, but we're going to talk about Cherokee Trail now. Cherokee Trail, as I mentioned, is returning a ton of talent. But first, let's talk about how they did last year here. Now, I looked at this squad last year and wasn't really sure which Cherokee Trail would kind of show up. And it was on the higher end of my projections here. I gave them a window of wins of 3-5. And they hit the ceiling with a 5-5 record, including a very close 3-point upset of Chatfield, in hindsight, calling that an upset, to start the year. Before taking care of business against Rocky Mountain, they then had a tough stretch, only winning one of their next 6 games against Fort Collins, but falling to Littleton West / Columbine, Castleview, Cherry Creek, Eaglecrest. That one only by 4, to be fair, and Arapahoe, but stopped the bleeding with an upset 2-point win over Grandview and rolling through Smoky Hill. With some seemingly steam heading into the playoffs, some thought CT might make some noise, but the Chatfield Chargers had other plans for their revenge and quickly dispatched of the Cougars in round 1. Now, some of those Cougars here, some of those cats that don't come back, include the likes of Jaden Smith and Devin Hapakowski here, who were the only seniors in the top 7 of tacklers, both recording 40 and 51 tackles respectively here. And Hapakowski being a real threat to make a play in the backfield, pacing all Cougars with 6 TFLs. This defense did not really have a de facto pass rusher, but between Jack Seeve, Hapakowski, Farnond, Smith, Zamora, Guthrie, and other seniors, that made up 9.5 of the 12 total sacks from last year. He also had Caden Sweets, who led this defense with 3 interceptions. And then the top 2 leading receivers, Peyton Castro and Carson Pierce, both caught for over 400 yards last season and will need their production replaced. However, they are going to be in a good spot looking ahead to their returning playmakers here, as they are getting the likes of Jacob Mathange and Peyton Sommers here. Some more reps and health will unlock these 2 great athletes, not only to match Castro and Pierce's production from last year, but hopefully to exceed that and fully unlock the talents of their quarterback, Tyson Smith, who has the look of a next-level quarterback, 6'1" and a wicked arm, but needs to hone in on his timing and understand he could take underneath or intermediate routes, or maybe the staff needs to understand that. But, this team has a very high ceiling with Tyson Smith. But at the same time, if those turnovers continue to rack up, that kind of puts a cap on how far this team can go here. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the other pieces here and kind of jump around here. Offensively, you get Wyatt Jones. That's a notable return to the lineup, putting forth quality snaps as just a sophomore last season. You also get 2 running backs who both ran for over 300 yards and both make a return for a senior season that hopefully they can both be healthy for, with the likes of Brian Tucker and Noah Collins. They struggled to find the end zone and will have to provide a little bit more big playability to kind of open up this passing game here. But, that's kind of the offensive rundown. It's the defense that gets me excited here. They're one of the few programs that has a player on the watch list on every level of the defense, starting with Marcus Adams and Cade Brook, both earning the nod at edge here, with Brook notching 47 tackles and 5 for loss, while Marcus Adams showed out for the Mile High Prep team in the spring season, earning our approval. You also have Blake Rodriguez, who could be on a top 5 linebacker campaign. He led the team in tackles with 78 and also recorded 2 interceptions and 2 forced fumbles and recoveries, just being a solid athlete, playing sideline to sideline and able to play the run and the pass exceptionally well, being a very balanced linebacker, being able to play both run and pass, very important for our watch list. So I already know that's going to stir up some controversy. But back to Cherokee Trail here, they also have incoming cornerback Marquise Jamison, more pass breakups than the next 4 athletes combined, and just does a great job with positioning and acceleration, making him another great secondary piece in a storied position group at CT. He also got Garrett Aldred, made our list at safety and was in the top 5 of the squad in tackles, And overall, 7 out of the top 10 tacklers come back. And with some chemistry in the secondary, this defense is in a prime spot to take a step forward, even with non-watchlist guys like Raul Rodriguez, who's a high-energy player, as well as some size that they have up front in front of him. He's going to look to make a huge impact as well. So take all this into account. I think this is an ideal setup with how heavy the juniors were on this squad last year, and this should be a good year for CT and one where they can really compete their tail off and make a push more so this year in league than maybe they normally do. And so without talking about their league, let's talk about their non-league schedule here. Their first game is at Pine Creek, then they follow that up with at Thunder Ridge, versus Mountain Vista, versus Rocky Mountain, and then versus Dakota Ridge here. That is a very prominent 4A team, obviously, here in Colorado high school ball. But let's go ahead and reel it back in just a little bit here. Talking about Cherokee Trail, I actually think that they should win this Pine Creek game on the road. I mentioned it in the Arapahoe segment. Go ahead and listen to Simon's preview as well. This team is just in a massive overhaul here and facing some serious controversy and some locker room cancers and problems, it sounds like. So definitely some issues there that I don't think will be resolved or settled down to win this game at home. At Thunder Ridge, I think that Cherokee Trail just returns a lot more talent than Thunder Ridge here. Versus Mountain Vista, I do think this is a loss, but this could be a very huge turning point and a potential upset, I think, that Cherokee Trail, if they have all their ducks in a row, could pull off and really shake up the state and some power rankings. But as far as it looks right now, just returner for returner, talent for talent, this is a game that Cherokee Trail probably doesn't win, before winning the next two against Rocky Mountain and Dakota Ridge, heading into league once again at 4-1. But the Centennial League is just a bloody, brutal league. We'll really see how legitimate these folks are against Cherry Creek at 6 p.m. on a Saturday, right? And so that's a very interesting start to league, and that's going to help them kind of adjust and dial in. I do think that they could beat this Eaglecrest team, and I kind of do have them favorited against Grandview as it stands right now. And, you know, Grandview, I'm not going to just, slander them. I think that they have a ton of returning pieces as well. I just like a little bit more what Cherokee Trail is returning and the caliber that the chemistry can bring them. So, you know, I think that they could be 2-1 going against Arapahoe. Like I said in the Arapahoe segment, that game can kind of go either way, but I think I kind of have Arapahoe favored because I think by that point, the defense is going to be dialed in. And, you know, it's at Arapahoe as well, or at LPS, I should say. And so I think that that is going to play a small factor into it before they beat Smoky Hill. So, interestingly enough, I see this being another good team in the Centennial League going 3-2. Obviously, in the Centennial League, anybody in the top 5 as far as Cherry Creek, Eaglecrest, Grandview, Arapahoe, they all have taken turns, taken shots at each other, and I think that any one of them could pull off a crazy upset against any of the other ones. So there's probably a surprise waiting for me in there here. But on the low end of things, I think that this is probably a 6 to 8 win season, just like Arapahoe. You know, it depends. Those windows of wins go a little bit crazy once you start looking at, you know, all of these Centennial League games. But I think that this squad probably also goes 7-3 and is a potential bye seed team, depending on tiebreakers, of course, heading into the playoffs. But I think that this, if there was ever a year for Cherokee Trail to make some noise, this would be the one. Now, moving on to Grandview, one of the more successful teams in the Centennial League over the past few years. That includes last year, where they rested in the 6 to 8 window of wins, and they scraped across the bottom of that window, but still hit it at 6-4 with some signature wins, like their 7-point win over Eaglecrest last year, doubling Fruita's point total, a big win over Fossil Ridge, but came into the postseason with a cloud of uncertainty after getting doubled themselves by Ralston Valley, getting beat over the top crazy by Arapahoe, and then a surprise loss to Cherokee Trail by 2, and then a bigger loss to Creek before the playoffs. But they shrugged those off, winning a close one over Douglas County by 7 at home before pulling off an upset of their own, beating Regis by 2 points. But then the magic wore off, or they just didn't have the mana that Chatfield had, who is even hotter at this point in the season, thus ending the Zarka era in Aurora here. And could not say it any better here than calling it the end of the Zarka era, as Liam Zarka terrorized the state for 3 years as a starter, including his first win being an overtime win and keeping defenses on their heels with good arm talent and athleticism that earned him a nod to the Air Force Academy for football. Zarka was constantly in the rotation as an award nominee here at the podcast. He was in all PMC conversations, and his career concluded with all of that leading to him being our number 1 spot in our class of 24 QB list. His senior year, he passed for 2,922 yards, which were the most of his career, which all combined for 6,685, as well as 60 total touchdowns over the past 3 years, and then ran for another 1,563 and 37 scores for almost 100 on his career on offense alone over the course of his 3 years as a starter. He truly will be missed as one of the best of our early days here at the pod. There's also a past and present teammate of Zarka's who will continue to be his teammate, as Nkongolo Wakalanji will be attending the academy as an outside linebacker / edge player who had 108 tackles last year and was second on the squad in TFLs with 11 and led the squad in sacks. You also lose Marcus Stevens, who is second in sacks with 4 and 10 TFLs by himself. Mason Pryor was the other senior in the top 5 of tackles with 67 and 7 of those being in the backfield. And last but not least, Denton was the only receiver who was in his senior year and recorded over 30 receptions, going for 516 yards and a quadruple post of touchdowns. And who is going to be next here at quarterback? And we are speculating / believing that will be Blitz McCarty here, who's probably the favorite to start at Grandview here. He is a watch list QB who have some nice weapons with the likes of Zay Nito, who's a potential top 5 senior receiver. He posted 1,007 yards and 9 scores last year. And then you also have Kyler Vaughn here, who led with 57 receptions and 10 receiving scores. And then you also get Dominic Henning here, who's a big body target who should cause some serious headaches for opposing defenses and be the third part of this Cerberus attack that is the Wolves passing attack. They also returned 2 running backs in Donovan Vernon and Chris Blanks. These guys combined for over 1,000 yards and 13 rushing touchdowns, but they'll have to dial it up a little bit on the second level for some bigger plays and explosiveness in this offense with a quarterback with less snaps than the eyes downfield Zarka had. Jackson O'Grady is a senior on this line who's accompanied by Royce Greer to pave lanes and keep blitz unaffected by the blitz. And then once you insert class of 27 Daniel Buckeye, this is a solid offensive unit for continuing life after Liam here. On the defensive side of the ball, you got Brandon Kerr or Kari, who was 119 tackles last year and will look to replicate that as a senior and will be joined as a leader on this squad with Marcus Nesbitt, who led in TFLs at 15, making up just about 30% of his total tackles here. The only other juniors with more tackles were Jack Narenbayer, who had 86 of his own, and Jericho Andrew. You also get the Flores brothers of Brody and Jackson, who both made the watch list, and with some offseason work with Grandview's cornerbacks coach, should look to trend towards all PMC or all state looks. Now, while I have maybe spoken a little bit down on Grandview as far as the other 2 previews goes, I don't think that means that they lose those games just flat out. I think this is still a very talented Grandview squad, one that is going to compete no matter who they're facing off against, but just one that's kind of in a little bit of a transition, looking more at probably an arc that resembles Zarka's sophomore year and kind of what that team maybe looked like. But let's take a look at their schedule. They open up with 2 home games, one against Legend, one against Ralston Valley. I think that they can go 1-1 in these games. I think that they can finally get their get back against Ralston, potentially, who just graduates a lot of talent from last year and barely returns anybody. Legend, on the other hand, returning a lot of very good players, namely Jaden Lawrence is probably the premier one, but plenty of guys who should make that game very difficult and put them at 1-1. They then play Legacy in Broomfield here. This game could potentially go either way, but I kind of have Grandview favored in this one for now. They then play Rock Canyon. Now, Rock Canyon kind of has a decent recipe to put the pressure on Grandview's offense in this game, where they just kind of control the ball, milk the clock, and just put Grandview in kind of a tough spot here and potentially drop them to 500 before they play Vista Peak Prep at home. I think that this is a very interesting matchup. Obviously, Coach Campbell of Vista Peak Prep is very familiar with Grandview, having coached against them over the years at Arapahoe, but this Vista Peak Prep team, I just don't know if they have the talent to match up with Grandview. And so Grandview could be either 3-2 or 4-1, potentially heading into league. But I think that we're looking at 3-2 before they face off against Arapahoe. They do have the benefit of this game being at home, but I think that Arapahoe kind of keeps rolling here and kind of has things dialed in and figured out. But Grandview could definitely get a win here and be looking at 4-2. Smoky Hill, that's a win. Cherokee Trail, I talked about this in the Cherokee Trail aspect. It says at, but really it's the same stadium here. Cherokee Trail just returning a little bit more that I like here, but the recipe for success and a win is definitely in Grandview's hands, but I still got Cherokee Trail favored in this one. Now, Eaglecrest is going to be returning a lot of dudes here from last season. So they are losing some big players, but I do have Eaglecrest favored in this game. And then at Cherry Creek, this is a game that they can win. They have pulled off this last game of the season win over Cherry Creek a few times over the years, whether that's because Creek isn't dialed in or because they're resting players or something like that, or because they just straight up get outplayed by Grandview. This is a game that they take very, very seriously over at Grandview, and so that could be a win, but I'm going to say for now that it is not. So Grandview here, I think at worst, this is kind of a little bit of a transition year for them. So there might be some struggles along the way, but they don't lose more than 6 games. So I'm going to say that the bottom of their WOW is 4. And I think that as good as they can be, they probably just do end up losing 3 of these games. So pretty big WOW here compared to some of the other teams that we've talked about so far of 4 to 7 games on the high end, obviously. I do think that this team probably goes like 5-5, honestly, just with a new guy under center and getting that kind of chemistry established. I think that they'll eventually get rolling as they get later in the season, but this defense has some ground to make up. And against some of these very high-flying offenses late in the year, I think that that's going to put kind of pressure on both sides of the ball to be kind of playing above their talent level maybe. And so that just puts them in a precarious spot here. So I'm going to say a record of 5-5, maybe even 6-4, honestly, just because they are pretty well coached on the defensive side of the ball. But, I don't think that they win more than 7 games this season. Now we're in for a tough discussion on Smoky Hill and what their season is going to look like here. Look, last year I said that the Bison should be Overland, and they did 7-0 for their one and only victory of the season. They never scored more than 14 points all season, and they were shut out in half of all contests last year. And this squad desperately needs a savior, as the last time they felt relevant was when they had crazy do-it-all quarterbacks. Shout out to our first year of the pod and LR3. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the graduated seniors here. You are losing Michael Keegan. He was good for 133 yards as the second leading receiver last season. They also graduate some size with the likes of Tyron Jordan leaving at 6'4", 285 pounds, and Carson Grantham, who is 6'6", 200. Defensively, the top 4 tacklers were seniors, and 6 of the top 7 tacklers all graduate, headlined primarily by Inu Niusulu, who had 8 TFLs, as well as Aomidi Cooper here, or Aomidi Cooper, who had 4 in the backfield. And these top seniors combining for over 100 solo tackles is going to be tough. But seeing as how this defense was pretty ineffective, maybe it's for the best that a reshuffle is in effect. As far as returning playmakers goes, they got Kodey Scott. He's the one leading non-senior who had 44 tackles. And then you bring back a watch list guy in Bailey Buhanda, who actually made 2 of our position lists here, both at interior offensive line and on the defensive side of the ball, coming in on his 4th year as a starter. You also bring back Flynn Lotta here, who impressed as a freshman on the interior of the Smoky Hill line, enough to warrant our attention heading forward. But all in all, this Smoky Hill team was extremely young on offense, with Zion Brake here struggling and probably to try and make something out of nothing a lot, occasionally connecting with Ramsey. And these two will probably have to carry the load for any hope of a passing game, but will be joined in their efforts by senior Earl Sims and class of 26 athlete Aaron Ball, who did a little bit of everything. Now, this team didn't get a ton of snaps to figure things out between turnovers and punts, so hopefully they can try and string drives together and make strides as the season goes on. Now, let's take a look at this schedule here that's going to be a little tough, obviously, for this squad. They start off against Overland to start the year. I actually think that they lose this rematch here. Overland returning one of the best running backs in state and also getting some exciting young talent from their freshman class who I think could make an immediate impact. They also face off against Douglas County. Douglas County, they always do a pretty good job of developing their backups here, and I think that they lose this game. Arvada West, this is a game that they lose. Rangeview is a winnable football game. It is at Rangeview. It's probably going to be close. Both these teams kind of returning bits and pieces of impact players on both sides, but no real superstars, I would say. And then to close league play, they have to go up to Boulder against Fairview. And then let's talk about their league play here. I'm just going to sprint through it, honestly. I don't think they beat Eaglecrest, Grandview, Arapahoe, Cherry Creek, or Cherokee Trail. Honestly, if they could beat any of these teams, that says more about the other team than it does about the success of Smoky Hill. So honestly, this could be a long season. I think at worst, they don't win a game, and at best, they win 2. I'll say 1-9 just to be considerate, but I am also kind of leaning towards that 1, and I'm kind of leaning towards 0-10, but I think that they should be able to beat this Rangeview team. We'll see. That's kind of a toss-up, but all in all, just going to be a long season for the Bison here. Now, the second and third spot is usually a pretty contentious spot, and even the first spot in this Centennial League is pretty contended here, and someone who I think could make a run for that or finish 1 through 3 there is Eaglecrest here. Last year, I projected the Raptors to go 6-4, and they finished 1 win above that, winning 7 and only losing to Grandview, Cherry Creek, and Arapahoe. Not playing a ton of other close games outside of a 4-point win over Cherokee Trail. And they weren't tested as well out of conference, and I think that that came back to bite them, however, as they did exit in their first playoff game to Legacy, 28-14. But I think that they might tweak some things here and see a couple of challenges in their out-of-league play. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the seniors who graduate. You know, this secondary loses 2 big playmakers and top 5 seniors in 3-year starter Cam Chappa at safety, 71 tackles, 4 picks, and 10 pass breakups, as well as our number 1 class of 24 cornerback Corey Jackson broke up 16 pass attempts his way, making for one of the best secondaries in the state last season. You also lose edge rusher Jermaine Amaya, not there for long, but was one of the leading pass rushers on the squad nonetheless. Shout out my boy Jermaine. And then you also have Tristan Mincy, who led the team in tackles and had more TFLs than the next 3 players combined at linebacker. You lose another top 5 guy in Weatherby here, Kale, that is, who graduated from Eaglecrest, but this one was rated as our number 1 interior offensive lineman in the class of 24. Losing a player that's smart and helps others find and make their assignments is something that can be hard to replace for a player of that caliber and that IQ. You also lose another top 5 target in Logan Ryan, who was the senior tight end who made life easier for their returning QB as a big body red zone target who just seemed too big for most defenders on his way to 690 yards and 12 scores. Now, you might be saying, Stauffer, what is your plan here for this team's path to victory when they're graduating 4 top 5 guys? And let me go ahead and answer that here, because they had a nice balance of seniors and younger contributors here, including multiple watch list guys, the likes of Ramajdi Owens here, 72 tackles, a pick 6, and 5 pass breakups. Edge rusher Tamario Walters, who led the squad with 10.5 sacks and another 10 hurries, and still have some dogs from last year's vaunted secondary. You get the likes of Elvin Ampafo as the last line of defense at safety, and then Joel Yaboa and Cameron Bell being cornerback 1 and 2, assumingly here. Even outside of the watch list, some playmakers that we're still hounding include the likes of Ronald Taylor, 6 hurries and 13 tackles with a bigger workload up ahead. Up front, you got Javon Jones, who will look to make an impact as a rising junior on the defensive line, as somebody who will have an eye on as a future watch list nose guard. Keeping it in the trenches here, you also get Thomas Lechuga here from the Dungeon fam, who will anchor one side for seemingly 2 more years, and then have the support of Parker Hawker on the inside of the line, or even possibly being scooted around, depending on the play call. Now, these guys are going to be opening up holes for the likes of Josh Wiley, a fun playmaker from last year, but not nearly as dynamic as junior year as some past Raptor runners, and will look to pump up that average yards per carry. You also have one of the PMC fam members in Sterling DeFore, one of the most avid lifters in the state, and while his best growth spurt has not hit yet, he loves contact, and he just needs to add a little bit more finesse to his game to get some more carries, but his junior year and his ability to take some of the load off and still pick up some yards makes this backfield committee a little bit stronger. Dropping back will be returning senior Joe Steiner. He went 125 for 225 for 1,876 yards and 23 scores to just 6 picks, all the while rushing for another 230 and a pair of scores. And who's he going to pass to without Logan Ryan? Well, luckily he returns his top 3 receivers following Ryan here, who caught scores, including Xavier Waldron, 447 yards and 5 scores, Xavion Gamble, and Kodey Becker, and those 3 combined for 1,046 yards and 10 scores that they will surely build off of heading into their collective senior year. Additionally, as of recently, it has been announced that 2025 watchlist linebacker Abraham Sosif is going to be a Raptor, which brings tremendous size, speed, strength, and athleticism to the spotlight as a huge X factor for this defense. So, like I said, just a huge blend of both seniors and juniors from last year's squad looking to come back and make some noise, and they will get a couple of wins outside of league initially. I think that this Grandview game basically feels like scheduling like an FCS opponent, as respectfully as I can put it, but that's a win for Eaglecrest. Versus Fort Collins, you are forcing Fort Collins to come down here, and I do think that Eaglecrest coaching is a little bit better than Fort Collins, or a lot of it. Granted, Fort Collins has a lot of studs, and I think that if Eaglecrest is too confident, they could lose this game at home, which is something that they have been known to do in the past from time to time. They then face off against Chatfield here on the road. I actually think that this is a game that Chatfield could win, honestly, but Eaglecrest is the favorite heading into this game, even on the road, in my opinion. They then face off against Denver East. I think that they should win this game. I think that this secondary is going to be a little bit too much for McDonald to handle, and is going to give them the W here. And then their last league game is at Thunder Ridge. I think that they should beat Thunder Ridge here. So, this team could be 5-0 heading in, but if they drop one of these 3 games against FOCO, Chatfield, or Denver East, I don't think it's the end of the world. I think if they drop 2, that kind of reverts my hype on this squad, not going to lie. So like 3-5 in this first half, and then league where it gets serious. They start off with Smoky Hill, and then they have all their toughest games of the season, in my opinion, all in a row. Versus Cherokee Trail, versus Cherry Creek, at Grandview, versus Arapahoe here. I think that at the peak of their powers, they could go 3-1 in this stretch. I think that 2-2 is a little bit more likely, and I even think that 1-3 is not outside of the realm of possibilities here. So, I think that at worst, this team wins 6 games. I think they win at least 6 games, honestly, but they could win as many as 9. Legitimately speaking. So I'm going to give them a window of wins of 6-9. However, I'm going to say that they go probably another, I'm just going to put 7-3 on basically all these middle of the pack teams and just see which one lives up to it, honestly, as they all just go for each other's jugular. But yeah, that's going to be Eaglecrest this season, and we'll see. We'll just see. Now, as far as the only team that should exist outside of this vacuum here of, what those initial games look like, is the Cherry Creek Bruins. Looking at last season, looking at how many starters they were losing, I thought the Bruins might slow down just a little bit, gave them a window of wins of 7-9, and they would surpass that here, going 10-0 in the regular season behind a run-heavy scheme and a defense that surprised me, and a ride of the wave to state, beating a handful of heavyweights along the way, including the likes of Ralston Valley twice, Chatfield, Regis, Arapahoe, Grandview, Legacy twice, and Mountain Vista before the magic ran out in a disappointing 28-14 loss to Littleton West in a game where the passing game did not pick up the slack and the special teams got exploited here. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some of these games from last year and how the seniors from last year impacted those games. we get another batch of top 5 senior talent roll through this time, especially on the offensive line with the likes of USC's Hayden Treater, Purdue's Max Parrott, Iowa State's A.J. Burton, and Colorado Mines' Evan Godden here, all being contributors to the Offensive Playmaker of the Year for 2023, in that being Cherry Creek's offensive line winning that award for us, the first time a position group has won that award, and the first time that linemen have won an award for anything in our PMC awards, and 3 of the prior 4 making our senior list, being big time for this squad of those top 5 positions. Jordan Herron was a shifty back who ate behind this line to the tune of 1,386 yards on 8.2 yards per carry and 18 scores, not to mention catching another 248 through the air. You also lose senior Tyson Mock as well as top 524 tight end Dawson Johnson. Those two combining for over 1,000 yards and 11 scores, with Mock leading the way at 7 of those. Defensively, you're losing Howell, Eli, Petridis, Johnson, and Owen. Those are all the seniors who eclipsed 70-plus tackles, with Howell leading the way at 159. And then up front, Exodus Johnson getting 76 at D tackle, as well as 6.5 for loss, which was the most from the senior group, not to mention another 4.5 sacks. You also lose Petridis' ability to play both the run and the pass that made him an easy pick for our number 1 linebacker in the class of 24. Please listen to that episode where we pay homage to one of the best multi-year starters in our coverage time. And then the secondary loses a handful of interceptions, most notably our top 5 corner maker Keon Johnston, as well as Damian McKeever here. Both recorded 4 interceptions apiece, not to mention Martinez Eli and Luke Owen, who had 3 apiece as well, contributing to 70% of interceptions out the door. Now, looking ahead to this schedule, this is one of the most challenging schedules that I think any Colorado team has really put together, at least at the time of them putting together. How will they fare? Well, let's take a look at who's coming back here and why I'm not too worried and why I think that they will be battle-tested and ready. One of those being Aiden Kanapke here, now a Washington State Cougar commit here. And by now, I mean following his senior season to close this chapter as a 4-year starter at Creek, including last season's Herculean effort here with over 100 tackles, leading his squad in INTs while laying down the hammer in the box and over the middle, is one of the best players to be returning on any team in the state. They also have one of the most coveted prospects following this season as well as the Prep Super League spring season, T.I., who is an absolute force to be reckoned with at D tackle with 7 TFLs and 3.5 sacks. You also have Nevada commit Keegan Perea here, who had 81 tackles last season and 6.5 for loss, while throwing on some more muscle this offseason and producing in the spring season for Mile High Prep for some good film. You bring back all PMC edge / linebacker here, Ashton Shepardson here, being a violent hammer last season, leading the Bruins at 9 TFLs and 8 sacks to go with his 69 tackles. Jack Francis here had 55 tackles and 6.5 TFLs up front, and if he comes back with a little bit more size, he could be another interior presence to complement T.I. You also bring back slot corner Trevin Polk here, who had an interception and some pass breakups here, and got shouted out by Keon as one of the players to watch next year. Offensively, I did mention 4 senior offensive linemen who graduate, yet somehow the trenches will be one of their strong points with the likes of incoming junior Ollie Miller, who has been claimed by Max Parrott as his protege, especially after spotting Ollie on an absolute monster max squat this summer. And then you also return Ned Zelinskis as well as Soren Schinofield, who both created lanes and a pocket for the Creek offense, as well as Caden Lee, who has some size to bring to the squad, probably at tackle. The Creek backfield will have a multitude of ways to attack, like Jaden Fox, who not only had the second most carries, yards, and TDs, but also can contribute in the passing game, and then Caleb Yamas here, who is 34 carries for 269 yards and 3 scores. Out of the backfield, however, Brady Vodka here got to almost 200 yards and had 4 scores, but instead increased his volume passing the ball, going for 2,331 yards and 25 scores on 69% completion percentage, but the spotlight will be bigger than ever for the junior following a state championship where Columbine dared Creek to beat them through the air, and Brady could not quite do it. With a Manning on the horizon and the most talented receiving core he's had yet, Brady will have to find a way to rise in the big game through the air to snuff out any potential QB controversy. Wondering why I'm mentioning the wide receiver room? Well, he does have the benefit of getting Max Levette here, or Lovett, who had almost 800 yards on 48 receptions and 9 scores. Just an absolute nightmare to deal with in one-on-one. You also get Jaden Irving, who did some devious work on the slot and hopefully sees an uptick in targets. And arguably the biggest move in the state is the Hoffmans moving from middle of nowhere Severance to Denver here. Shout out to Gloria, Shark Tank winner and entrepreneur here. And shout out to Jeremiah Hoffman here, who is going to be one of the best receivers in the class of 25, who gives Cherry Creek the most weapons of Vodka's or Brady Vodka's career. So while these are all awesome, this team is going to push themselves a lot more this year than they did last year. They lost in state, and they're going to face the 6A losers of Utah to start their season on the road. That is going to be Skyridge here. Skyridge went 11-3 last season, losing to Corner Canyon in the 6A state championships here. That is a really good squad that they are going to face off against. Obviously, I love this. 3 of Columbine's 5 games are out-of-state games here. They do benefit from Skyridge graduating their biggest contributors on offense, at least, but this is still a prestigious program from out-of-state here as Colorado tries to claim this area here. They also will face off against the Millard North Mustangs. This time, they will be playing this game in Nebraska, so they go from Utah to Nebraska, looking to be one of the highest impact squads in the country here. And, Millard might have struggled out of league, but they rallied down the stretch in their league, winning some big games late and look to ride that momentum into a competitive game against Cherry Creek here. They then return home after that 2-game out-of-state traveling streak here to face off against Regis, who's going to be really good this year. Creek typically has their number here, but we'll see how battered and worn down and weary they might be following 2 straight out-of-state games. This is a great chance and opportunity for Regis to potentially steal a game here, but I don't put it past Creek to potentially win this. And then the real creme de la creme here is Highland Park. That is a squad from Dallas, Texas. I'm sure Simon's going to enjoy hearing this preview a little bit here. This team was very, very good in Texas last year here, going 11-2, only losing 1 regular season game against the like of Lake Highlands. These are all very storied and very productive teams that they beat last year. And the team that they lost to was South Lake Carroll. If you don't know about South Lake Carroll, they are a little bit sus, but they really do play some good football, unfortunately, for their suspect tendencies and traditions here. But that is 3 out-of-state games to start the year, and then games against Regis Jesuit. And luckily, Pine Creek is not the same team that they probably thought they were originally scheduling here, that they should be able to get a win against. Now, in an absolute nightmare scenario, I think that Creek probably goes 2-3 in this stretch. But I think that they should go 4-1, honestly, in this stretch. Probably that Highland Park game is going to be tough. I hope that they win, obviously, because I think that that'd be really good for the state itself. They also play Regis after only 6 days after Millard North. So even if they win those first 2 games, that is going to be a quick turnaround here before they finally get an 8-day break, but we'll be back on the road in Dallas. So with that in mind here, they do head into league play, and I do think that they are still the favorites to win this league. I think especially after getting battle tested here, as long as they're healthy following these road trips here, which there's a chance that they might not be, between the travel, the rest and recovery, and the talent of these other teams. They might be a little banged up heading into this league here, and that could be a chance for Cherokee Trail to potentially pull off a wild upset here. But I think after that, they could potentially settle down and rattle off some wins. At worst, I think they go 4-1 in league. And, if they go 4-1 outside of that, this is a window of wins of, I think, probably 7-9 once again. If they do go 10-0 with these 3 road trips early in the season, this could potentially be one of the greatest Colorado football high school teams ever. Really, truly. I love that they're testing. I love that they're representing for the state. I love that these Kids are going to get a chance to compete. I think it's going to be great for the recruiting here in Colorado if they do really well. So I do wish them well, but that is just a lot to ask here. I'm going to say 9-1 final record. But like I said, 8-2 would not surprise me whatsoever, especially staying healthy. That's something that you got to talk about a little bit more in this. So window of wins of 7-9 here, but projected record on that high end of 9-1. Now, I'm going to switch it up on y'all and not talk about an entire league to make sure that you listen to next week's episode, but we have quite the shakeup here on the 5A level as far as one of these conferences here, formerly kind of known as the Jeffco League here. It has been severely rearranged and now is called the Metro 5A League here. And so I'm going to talk about some of the teams that maybe aren't getting as big of a boost potentially here, and some of the newer squads in this league as well here. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the returning teams here that have some interesting upside first. I'm going to talk about Arvada West for now here. Arvada West, I gave them a window of wins of 3-5, and they made it to 5-5, beating teams they were supposed to, like a Thunder Ridge, like a Boulder, like a Horizon, like Lakewood and Pomona. But, with how young this team was, they just weren't quite ready or competitive against other playoff caliber teams. Talking about Cherry Creek, talking about L West, talking about Ralston Valley. But, they made the playoffs and lost a close one to Rock Canyon down the stretch, 20-14, that I think is putting them in a pretty decent position to compete here heading into the fall 24 season. But let's talk about some of the seniors, the very few seniors here from last year's team. They'll be without some size as Giovanni Panazzo, Ezekiel Nail, and Angelo DeMont all graduate, all of those guys being over 230 pounds and all over 6 foot here. You also lose Tegan Shantz and Cameron Meyer. Both of these guys had over 90 tackles and combined for over 20 TFLs, as the minority here being just 2 of 4 seniors in the top 12 tacklers. But Meyer's impact was felt everywhere, with him also notching 2 interceptions and 3.5 sacks. You lose Cooper Greason and Chris Rosner here. Both had over 60 tackles as the other seniors of the defense and double-digit TFLs combined. But let's talk about the lengthy segment here now for A West, and that's the returning playmakers. This section's about to go crazy as the majority of starters on both sides of the ball were not only not seniors, but most were underclassmen as sophomores. In the secondary, Jaden Nichols led the team with 3 INTs and 9 pass breakups. You also get lengthy safety Atticus Tillman here, who had a pick and a few pass breakups coming back to the secondary here. Caleb Gomez was a little undersized last season, but that did not stop him from blocking 3 field goals as well as breaking up 5 passes here. At linebacker from the 26 class, you have Jackson Pyatt, who is back after leading the team with 99 total tackles, 55 of those being solo, and 17 cracks in the backfield here. His running mate, Kevin Sanchez, notched 60 tackles and 10 TFLs himself, solidifying the middle of the field against the run, and both these guys hoping to impact the pass game just a little bit more. And speaking of pass game, let's go ahead and talk about the passing game for A West, who returns all of their weapons from last season with Noah Murr, Aiden Garcia, and Keegan Ballesteri here, who combined for over 1,000 yards, and Aiden Garcia here actually leading the pack with 6 scores. You get Logan Duhacek here, who is a little bit of a mixed bag his sophomore year, but still threw more touchdowns than INTs, struggled to time some throws and accurately throw intermediately, but made some good decisions here and could improve on that in the film room and work on his timing and hopefully take a little step forward. He'll have a little bit of a crutch here with sophomores Samala and Green rushing for over 2,000 yards last year, Adrian Samala rushing for 12 scores and being a capable check down option for Logan here. And there's another Samala at guard in Jaden Samala, who was supposed to get that watch list nod and will put in that work in the trenches. Defensively, you also get Vincent Vigil and Christian Nightwalker up front, who are juniors who got in the backfield and pressured the quarterback, and both are supposed to be leaders this coming season. So let's take a look at their upcoming schedule and project how well they're going to do. So they start off the season at home versus Fountain Fort Carson. This Fountain Fort Carson's team does a pretty good job at reloading. this one could go either way. The fact that it's at home helps out significantly. But, we'll see. I think that this defense is in a position to stop FFC. We'll see if this offense is in a position to score more than FFC. But, Fountain Fort Carson, they kind of excel at these low-scoring games. And especially in the first week of the season, this definitely favors Fountain Fort Carson a little bit more. They then go to Mountain Range. That's not even worth talking about, honestly. They're going to mop there. And then they play at home against Fairview. I actually think this should be a pretty interesting game, but I do have A West favored. I think that by this time, the offense should be a little bit more dialed in, and I think that the defense matches up pretty well against Fairview's offense as far as, that spread that they run. But then especially if they go to that Fairview wing T thing, that is going to play right into A West's hands here, and I think that this is a win, especially at home. I think that they beat Smoky Hill versus Overland. This is a potential upset game if you don't take it seriously, but this is a game you should win. And then you should beat new member to the league, Denver South. Unfortunately, I think that they do lose to Littleton West. The Rebels just return a ton of guys on that line here. Stay tuned for that next episode. Then new member, Denver East. This is going to be a very fun game. Both of these squads are going to have a ton of playmakers from last season. It's in Denver. This is going to be a very, if I can make this game, I would really, really like to make this game. I think that Logan and Declan here, both being junior quarterbacks, makes this a very juicy matchup that really could go either way. I still probably favor Arvada West just because they've been a little bit more tested with the guys that they faced last year, but either way, should be a classic, honestly, and maybe one of the best games of the entire year. They then follow that up with Chatfield. Now, Chatfield is losing a lot of talent, I will say, at some very important positions. However, they are returning a lot of playmakers, and I don't think that they're going to take a huge step back on offense, honestly. I like some of the guys that they have coming in. And then, some younger guys who've kind of been waiting for their chance to really show out, and they got a very solid coaching staff out there in Chatfield. So this game could go either way. I'm going to favor Chatfield for now, just because I like some of the senior talent they're bringing in, because a lot of these A West players, a lot of these cats here are going to be entering their junior year for the most part, and I think that still leaves a little bit of room to grow. And then versus Ralston Valley, this is a potential upset alert for RV, but I do think that A West wins this one on Halloween. Ooh, we got a little bit of a scary matchup here for them. And, if they believe in omens, that's not a good thing. But I still think that's a game that I favor them to win. So if we take into effect all the games that I favor them to win, they do go 7-3 here. They could drop one of these games to like an East to a Fountain Fort Carson. And there's a chance that they only lose to Chatfield and Littleton West. So kind of a big window of wins here of 5-8, but definitely higher expectations than last year here. And I'm going to project their record here that they go 7. I'm going to say 7-3, honestly. I think that they land smack dab in the middle. Like I said, that early season matchup, I think, favors Fountain Fort Carson just a little bit more and the brand of football that they play. But down the season here, this team is really going to pick up. And I think that that's going to help A West in the long run, if I'm being completely honest. I think that's going to help them win that game against Fairview. I think that that's going to help them win that game against Denver East potentially. But, when talking about these teams, obviously it can kind of go either way. But no matter how you break it down, without saying either way, for the 80th time this segment here, I think that this Arvada West team is going to be significantly better than last year, and I'm excited to see what they can produce and how far they can go based off the development of these young players. Now, the other team that I kind of talked about from this segment, they were on a tear last year. This is a team that's quote-unquote returning to this league, if you want to call it that, because I believe it belongs to them. That is Ralston Valley here. They were one of the best teams in football last season. They earned a tough 13-7 win against Mountain Vista to start their season before a crushing loss on the road to Cherry Creek. Kind of acted as a reset on their bye week here, but following their bye, they strung together some tough and very strong wins against Grandview, Regis, a comeback 1-point win over Valor for their first time in school history, a big win over Lakewood before dropping their second regular season game against the other team that went to state. Then they finished the season strong, beating Pomona, Chatfield, and A West to finish 8-2. In the playoffs, they had a bye and then beat Rock Canyon, dismantled Pine Creek on the road, but then lost to Cherry Creek in a slugfest in the semis to end the Madden era and turn a new page in the Yanacito era. I give them a projected wow of 6-8 and expected 8-2, and that is exactly what happened. Like I said, losing to Columbine and Creek being the only two teams that were in state being their only losses. So, I chalk that up to success. I think that this was one of their better chances to win state, but under Yanacito, we will see where this team heads. Now, they are losing seriously a lot. You got Logan Madden, incredibly important to leading the Mustangs to the semis the past 2 years, especially this year, throwing for almost 3,000 yards and 68% completion, 22 TDs to 6 picks. All of his leading receivers graduate. Jackson Hansen, who had over 1,100 yards and 13 scores, is a chunk to lose. You're also losing Bonalo, who had 1,000, and then Morwood and Strange, who combined for 600 yards and leave as well. Brady Weldon stepped up, going for over 1,000 yards and 15 scores with some clutch touchdowns, but is also graduating. Defensively, you lose Laird Jones, who was the big hitter of this defense, for 133 tackles and 7 TFLs, and cleaned up anything his line didn't blow up. His line being absolute stacked with the likes of Tyrese Johnson, George Patterson, who combined for 150 yards or 150 tackles. Patterson leading all Mustangs with 13 TFLs. You also lose Jack Moran, as well as Peyton Noble, who were also two-way monsters in the trenches. Patterson, Huffman, Johnson, and Jones combined for 15 sacks. Patterson pressuring the quarterback a ton with a lot of hurries. Overall, this defense loses the top, not just some of, the top 12 tacklers to graduation, leaving a lot of room for folks to step up. You also lose 8 out of 11 interceptions from the secondary, not to mention Tyrese Johnson's impact in the passing game at D-line, batting 10 passes at the line, minimizing some damage. Just a crazy amount of impact. Top 5, Peyton Nobel was a top 5 guy and somebody who we interviewed. Please go listen to that interview. Just kind of brutal, honestly, for this squad that's probably getting a little bit of those effects of what we kind of put on the program a few years ago. So sorry about that, Coach Yanacito. Love and respect you. And let's see what he can cook up here with some of the skill guys who come back. I'm looking at a Louis Madera here, who at corner was a class of 26 stud. If healthy, Liam Beatty is a game breaker who could be a crutch for whoever is in at quarterback, as well as cleaning things up in the secondary and at wideout. They will probably have to have him play both ways, but he's going to have to monitor his health to ensure that he does get a senior season. You also have Austin Blattner, who had some quality looks as a sophomore and will be integral to leading this team that will be very young compared to last year. So taking a look at the schedule, it's going to be kind of a long year here. They have a crazy, insane schedule. They face Erie to start things off. I actually think Erie is favored in this game. They are, at least for me. Grandview, I think, gets their revenge for the past few years. Mullen here, theoretically, has the talent to beat Ralston Valley. We'll see if they have the mentality to beat them, especially because they have to travel up to Ralston Valley's house. So this one could go either way. I favor Mullen right now. Thunder Ridge here, I think that this is a game that they do win here. Thunder Ridge, I did project to go, unfortunately, 0-10 with things just kind of not settled and not a ton of talent. They then have Valor Christian on the road. I think that they lose that game with how much Valor is returning. They play at Chatfield. I think that this is Chatfield's chance to get a get back here, but this game could go either way, just with a little bit of that league rivalry going. Denver South, I think, is a winnable game here. I do think that both these teams are kind of in a rebuild here. Denver South is returning a little bit more top-end talent, I would say, but we'll see who can win this chess match of coaching. I don't think that they stand a chance against Columbine, to be honest. I think that at home versus Denver East, this could be winnable, but Denver East is definitely favored. And then, like I said, against Arvada West, they have a chance to play spoiler on Halloween, and this team with this schedule could still probably make the postseason if they win 3 of these games, which I think is something they can do. I just think that on the high end, I think if they're lucky, they win 5 games in this season, which sounds a little harsh, but really this is just a brutal schedule. At worst, they definitely win 2 games. I think that I probably have them going 3-7 here and being one of the rare 3-7 cases who make the playoffs and maybe be a team that's a bit newer to the season here. But this is going to be a tough rebuilding year. They're going to probably have to invest in some younger guys, see if they can build something here for the future years. Granted, Yanacito, he is a floor raiser here, so expect him to be in his bag, maybe get into some tricks here, and see them pull off a potential 5-5, maybe even crazy 6-4 season. But I definitely, I'm going to say window of wins actually of 3-5, honestly. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt because of Yanacito here, that they will find a way to win. They should win 3 of these games, and they don't blow one of them. Now, we've mentioned them in passing, but there are 2 new teams that kind of make this the Metro League, if you would. And so let's go ahead and start on the south side and talk about the Ravens. I love that they're moving up to 5A. But, it's an interesting time for this team because last year they did make the postseason with wins over Skyline, Longmont, Cheyenne Mountain, and then rattled off 3 in a row in league against Gateway, Vista Peak Prep, and Far Northeast. Before the 3-game win streak, they lost every other game, losing to Denver East, Golden, and a big loss to Pondo before eventually losing the league title to Thomas Jefferson 21-12. Now, in the first round, they drew Vista Ridge and eked out a 1-point victory before they lost to Palmer Ridge to conclude their season. I gave them a window of wins of 6-8 and said they should make the postseason but not have a bye. That is exactly what happened as they went 6-4 and made the postseason. They will be graduating some major contributors on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, such as J.R. Felipe, somebody who knew the system at QB and ran the offense well with 28 total touchdowns through the ground and air. But more importantly, some cogs of this machine on offense included Guevara, who ran for 422 yards and 4 scores. And this offense heavily leaned on Chevelle early here to the tune of 203 carries for 1,373 yards and 9 scores. Orlando Guevara was also third in receiving yards, just behind fellow senior, Braylon Trevetta, who between the 2 of them, apologies on that, combined for over 500 yards and 8 scores. You also lose the top 5 defenders for this squad, who are all seniors, including the likes of Jeremiah Mary, Brooks Vital, Alex Van Stel, Chris Garcia, and Orlando once again, with 72, 66, 53, 46, and 46 tackles respectively. And then Garcia, Van Stel, and Emery all had double-digit TFLs. And those same guys led with sacks, and overall only 1 recorded sack returns for next season. In the pass defense, the Ravens might be a fly zone next season with 7 of their 9 interceptions graduating, including their only 2 defenders with multiple being Middleton Cunningham and Vegas, those guys having 2 and 3 respectively. Now, returning to the fold for the Ravens here is the likes of defender Logan Kramer, had an interception and 2 fumble recoveries. You also get the leading tackler, who's not a receiver, in Daniel Lucado. He had 42 tackles last season, so just outside of that window of some of those other guys from the top 5 defenders. You also get another class of 26 standout in Errol Rovinsky here, who had 6 TFLs. And then the easy player to talk about who's coming back here is Elijah Landrum Hamilton, the 4A newcomer of the year, who recorded 60 receptions as a freshman for 804 yards and 7 scores, who helps potential incoming passers. Looking at maybe starting as a freshman, Armstrong Dise here potentially. But we'll see what comes out of the quarterback room and what that means for this Denver South team. But ultimately, this is definitely a rebuilding year and their first year in 5A. Kind of a double whammy. They opened up versus Westminster. Now, this is a game that they can win just because Westminster lost a lot of offensive pieces. But I am going to favor Westminster in this. I'm then also going to favor Fountain Fort Carson in that second game here. And then Vista Ridge is an interesting case because they had some personnel changes, but they also had an influx of a few guys, as well as Zayden Stevens getting to iron out his game and perfect his craft in his 4th year as a starter, I want to say. At least 3rd year, maybe 4th. So this could also be a loss before they play Vista Peak Prep here on their on the 5A level now here. This should be a very interesting game. I'm kind of favoring Vista Peak Prep here, but this game really, really can go either way. They then face Northfield, who's from the 4A level. I think that they do take care of business and win that game. So you could be looking at 1-4 heading into league before playing an Arvada West team that's returning a ton of talent. Ralston Valley, this is probably your best chance for a win in league. Chatfield, Columbine, and then maybe with strength of schedule, and for Denver East especially with all their returning talent, this could be a playoff punch on the ballot here for Denver East versus Denver South. Denver South with an opportunity to play spoiler against their rival with whom they share a field and stadium with. We will see how this goes. This is a very exciting game near the conclusion of the season. That's at 11 a.m., so that's going to be a Saturday game once again. And I love this rivalry between East and South here. So it should be an exciting season. At worst, Denver South wins just one game. I don't think that they go winless. I just don't think that's how this program really rolls. But on the high end, I think if everything goes right, they probably only win 4 games with how their out-of-league schedule is programmed here. So for their first year in 5A, I'm going to say that they go... I'm really going to say that they go 1-9. However, the window of wins should buy me some grace with this squad and community here. As on the high end, I think they could win 4 games, and based off their league play and how close they might play any of these teams, could still make a playoff bid in their first year in 5A. And now finally, the newest team to this 5A Metro League is Denver East Angels here, coming off a historic season from last year here. Coach V was very high on the Angels with a window of wins of 5-8 and projected a win total of 7, and East was right in that neighborhood, going 8-2, hitting the upper limit of that I'm sure Simon would have called for had he known they'd play Westminster twice, but behind a playmaking defense and just enough offensive firepower, this squad made a ton of program history, beating Mullen in the postseason before their season loss in an emotional rematch against Pine Creek in the second round, but otherwise dispatched of most teams, including a huge win over Denver South that snapped a long-time losing streak against that squad, as well as taking their time and getting some things done against other 5A programs. They're only a little loss coming against Rock Canyon, I want to say. So looking ahead to what they are missing this fall, let's go ahead and talk about some of the graduated seniors. I think the main headline here has to be top 5 linebacker Landon Holloway. Please listen to episode 368. That is his interview. And yeah, he kind of set a ton of records, including the East single season tackle record, I believe, here, and also made them in important spots with over 20 of them in the backfield, making a lot of plays in the pass game with 3 interceptions and 9 pass breakups, while also being an absolute hammer of a hitter with 4 forced fumbles. They also lose Elias Goss here. It was the next senior up with 59 total tackles, but with a chunk of those in the backfield and being the second leading sack artist on the squad with 7. They also lose MJ Daly, who is next up on that list of sacks with 4 and was up there amongst tackle leaders. And then big Elijah Goss did not get to play the whole season, but would have been probably a top 5 interior D lineman. In those 4 games, he had 4 TFLs and was just too big and too strong for South when we went and saw them. So primarily defensive playmakers graduating from last year. Let's see how they refurbish that and maybe what the other side of the ball looks like and how they're going to try and take a step forward on offense. But before that, we're going to talk about DJ Crow, absolute game wrecker up front. Was, I believe, an all-PMC guy and should make anyone else's job easier, especially if he matches his 15 sacks from last season. There were 4 other juniors in the top 8 of tackles, like Dion Giles-Ray, Pierce Bernard, Elijah West-Dua, and Jai Winston, who all had over 40 tackles and bring a ton of chemistry as a senior unit. You also have Edward Torr here, listed at 260, and as a sophomore last season, could see some more snaps heading into his junior year on this defensive line. You also bring back Chase Williams, who had 7 turnovers, 5 interceptions, and 2 fumble recoveries last season, being a huge part of the 40-plus turnovers this defense forced. In addition, you have West Dua, Winston, and Giles Ray, who all got in on the interception action with 4 apiece for the first 2 and another 2 for Ray, while this trio combined for 35 pass breakups, and Winston went nuts, blocking 3 punts, and this secondary will look to fly around and force teams to run the ball. Now, offensively, anchoring the offensive line will be class of 25 tackle Saray Thomas, and then on the interior, you can get some serious size in Jesus Carrillo and Jesse Matthews, both being over 6 foot and 290 pounds, to open up some lanes for the dogs in the backfield. One of those dogs being West Adua, two-way stud here, who's a weapon on offense with 629 yards and 7 scores. But the premier/lead back is going to be Sean Campbell. I believe, talking to Landon, he also owns the record for most rushing yards in a season with 1,271, as well as 13 scores, if not just a record of the 21st century at least. The passing game also has potential to take another step forward as the top 4 receivers all come back. Some familiar names we already mentioned, Giles Ray, West Dua, but in addition, Lowell Pepple comes back after leading in receptions, and they might get an X factor as well, I believe, in Jeremiah Armand Jr. So TBD on if that's confirmed and all of that. But that is all under the assumption that Declan McDonald, who threw for over 1,600 yards and 17 scores last season, will take a big step forward with how much more difficult their schedule will be this year in some ways. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But let's go ahead and take a look at their schedule and see where exactly it gets more difficult. Initially, they start off against Sand Creek. This is a game that they should definitely win. And then they have a pretty interesting matchup against Vista Peak Prep. This is also going to be on a Saturday at 2 p.m. here. Vista Peak Prep retooling a little bit, getting a little bit more talented under center, getting a little bit of an upgrade at coach. This game could go either way. I'm going to favor Denver East initially. And I also am going to favor them over Liberty here to start off the season 3-0. I don't know if they beat Eaglecrest. This team is pretty deep in a lot of different positions. And for East, obviously, these guys who play two ways are going to have their hands full against the playmakers of Eaglecrest's offense and defense. And I think that that is just a tough challenge that you can't really overcome without a ton of depth. They then get a decent break of, I want to say, 9 days before facing Montbello here. Welcome to the neighborhood, Montbello. I think this should be a good game, but I think that East should probably win this, as this is Montbello's first full season as a varsity squad. They have some watch list guys on that squad. They're going to have some good coaching, but I think that this is probably a game for East to lose. Or this is their game to lose, I should say. It's a game that they should win. Now, they kick into league against Columbine. I don't think that they have the size in the front seven to keep up with this Columbine line. I think that they also lose to Chatfield on the road, but this is a game they could win, honestly. I think that they have the firepower here, but it just depends on what Chatfield's quarterback situation kind of looks like at this point in the year, as well as Brock Narva's health for a lot of these Chatfield games. Stay tuned for next episode where I talk more about Chatfield and the teams that are kind of keeping their stay, as well as other leagues and whatnot. Against Arvada West, I talked about this in the A West segment. I have A West favored, but Denver is playing at home, to be fair, and it is on a Friday, so maybe they can get the stands packed and see if they can mess with A West's play calling here, but this is probably a loss. They then finish the season at Ralston Valley and at Denver South. I think that they should win these two games. They could potentially go 1-1, but I think they should win those games. So if you account for the games that I just don't really see them winning, at best, I think that they go 7-3, honestly. At absolute worst, they go 5-5. But I think that 6-4 is an appropriate prediction for Denver East here on my exact record. And like I said, 5-7 is the window of wins here. I think any worse than 5, and that's a disappointment of a season. Any more than 7, you're surpassing expectations and you're upsetting an Eaglecrest, a Columbine, a Chatfield, or an A West, or two of those teams, I should say, en route to an 8-2 season. But I think that 6-4 is right smack dab where they're going to land and be a bubble/fringe playoff team that probably makes it in and has an interesting first round matchup. And that'll do it for this episode of Playmakers Corner. Obviously, I recapped Arapahoe, Cherokee Trail, Grandview, Smoky Hill, Eaglecrest, and Cherry Creek of the Centennial League. And then from the 5A Metro League, I talked about Arvada West and Ralston Valley. and then Denver South and Denver East, the newest additions to that league. Be sure to stay tuned for Wednesday, where I will talk about the defending state champions, as well as Chatfield, who was in the semis last year, and a little bit more about a handful of other programs and what they will be bringing to the table in 5A, as well as making my way towards 4A. So thank you so much all for listening. You probably listened on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you do listen to us, or YouTube. Make sure that you are subscribed or following us and have notifications turned on for all of the latest episodes and when we release it. And then go ahead and follow us on our socials for even more content, as well as episode covers such as Instagram at Playmakers Corner, TikTok at Playmakers Corner, Facebook Playmakers Corner, or on Twitter.